yes, we're taking some difficult decisions to spend less, but we're doing that not just to build, to invest more as a country, but also to preserve what makes Canada. And that's childcare, that's healthcare, that's pharmacare, dental care, national food program, because this is a fundamentally generous country and we care about each other. So yeah, at the end of my time, and as I'm passing on, metaphorically passing on as well, because I'm never going to die, I'm going to be around forever. Those values and those who come after are just building on that, those types of approaches.
There you guys have it, man. Mr. Carney talking about, I don't even think he knows exactly what he's preaching anymore. Today is Wednesday, December 31st. We're pushing into the new year. I wanted to cover this story because it's I think it's big news, guys, to be honest. This big push back into nuclear. I don't think it's accidental. I think there's a big reason why this push exists. And before I get into the article, we've seen this for decades. We've had our governments claim that nuclear power, it's too expensive, it's too slow to build, it's too risky for modern economies. We're building these nuclear reactors, they're dangerous, right? Let's all just focus on renewables, clean tech, right? Let's pray that the wind blows and that the sun shines in Canada. Let's pray that the sun shines. When we have our own uranium, we have our own source for stable nuclear power, and it's clean. Nuclear power is clean tech, guys. But let's avoid it. Right? And obviously, Ontario has, we have the Niagara Falls hydroelectric power dam, which is amazing. And it provides like 60% of Ontario's power needs, which is amazing, right? But other parts of the country don't have that luxury. And that's where nuclear power comes into play. This is exactly why China's had a heavy focus on nuclear power for so long. They started switching their coal plants with nuclear because it's just more stable, right? And they had their own problems, actual problems with smog that Canada never really had. Russia's always been a big nuclear player because they also just have a ton of uranium, and why would you want to use anything else other than this insanely stable power source, right? The Western philosophy has always been focused on, let's see if the private sector is going to cover it, right? But not that many people in the private sector have the kind of money that you need to build an actual nuclear reactor, right? And so it never went anywhere, right? But that's why clean tech took off, because clean tech is easy to finance. It's easier to push. You can find a niche market for it, right? But then what happens? What happens, guys? What happens is that artificial intelligence shows up. Cloud computing becomes drastically more powerful. And what it ended up exposing is just exactly how fragile the Western power grids really are. And so what's driving this nuclear revival, and this is my opinion, it's not climate policy or ideology. It's literally the hard reality that AI data centers are about to overwhelm our existing electric power grids, right? And I'd like to get into the article right now just a little bit. So it says the West is spending big on nuclear plants again, and taxpayers and taking taxpayers along for the ride. It goes, one question separates announced but purely hypothetical nuclear power plants from those that actually stand a chance of being built. Who's going to pay for them? In China and Russia, which dominated reactor construction for the past few decades, governments provided the funds. And this is exactly what you would want. Energy infrastructure is a strategic resource. This is something that governments need to fund. This has to be government funded because it's a strategic resource. You don't want to leave this up to the market, because sometimes the government needs to be the one that provides the infrastructure for the private sector to evolve adequately. And I feel like this is a logical thing that has to constantly be announced, right? We constantly have to be painting it on a big placard and a big canvas that the government has to be the one that's going to provide the blank slate, the infrastructure for private sector companies to do innovate and to do the job that they're meant to do, right? And so here it goes. It goes, advanced economies placed much greater emphasis on private capital. That approach was intended to impose greater commercial discipline and protect the public purse, but led to very few reactors being built in the West. Yeah, because they're expensive. It's expensive to build. There's a lot of regulation behind it. No one wants to deal with high regulation in a long construction time. No one wants to deal with that. That's something that the government needs to deal with, especially when it comes to nuclear. The government should be the one that's responsible for something as potentially destructive as a nuclear power plant. Why would you want to leave this to the private sector? Like, quite literally, why? That's like practically equivalent to having your military, your actual military, the people with the guns that are supposed to protect the country, be a privately owned entity that the government is paying for, right? As like conscripts, or not even conscripts, as like mercenaries. You have like a private mercenary army that's protecting your country. Like, that doesn't make sense. You want to be the one that owns that, and that you're going to be the one as a country, as a nation state, as a government that's going to support your country, the people, with stable power, with industry with stable power, so that you can make cool fucking shit like AI, right? Then it goes, yet in 2025, Western governments returned to funding nuclear plant constructions. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford stood shoulder to shoulder in October before a full-size replica nuclear reactor used for training, as they committed a combined $3 billion to a new nuclear power station in the early stages of construction in Clarington, Ontario, next to Darlington Nuclear Generation Station. I don't know about you guys, but $3 billion isn't a lot of money when you are in desperate need for power, right? It goes, within days, this grand gesture was paled in comparison with a U.S. government announced heralding at least $80 billion in financing to build reactors from Westinghouse Electric Company on American soil. The Trump administration had apparently already sourced that funding from the Japanese government. It's the kind of commitment the nuclear industry has long needed to turn surfeit of speculative early-stage announcements into actual plans. Nuclear power is experiencing renewed policy support in many markets, according to a November report by the International Energy Agency. Based on existing policies, the agency predicted solar and wind will continue to greatly increase their share of power generation in advanced economies. But while the IEA predicts both public and private nuclear investment will remain on a much smaller scale, it has already risen more than 70% over the past 5 years and could meet more than 1/10 of the growing demand for electricity over the next decade. This is exactly what needs to happen. Like, you cannot focus your economy on the private sector as a nation, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as power. Clean tech in the forms of solar power, wind power, even batteries, that's like lithium ion batteries for battery energy storage. That is one like field of power generation that is not stable. We saw what happened in Texas when the wind turbines, when they froze over, or that 1 year in the UK when there was so little wind that they ended up having a serious electricity shortage in the UK because the bulk of their power needs were supported by offshore wind turbines. And so the reason why this is all important is because AI is coming in big. It uses tons of energy. Tons of power are needed to support this. And if you don't have stable power infrastructure to support your AI needs, your cloud computing needs, those companies are going to be forced to go to markets that are able to support them. And right now it's China. So, I mean, what are you going to do with that? And so modern AI, it's not it's software isn't what's constrained. It's the electricity is constrained, right? It uses a lot of electricity. A single large AI data center can consume 300 to 1,000 megawatts of continuous power. That's a lot, guys. It's the equivalent of a mid-sized city. So, to give you guys context, a typical house uses about 1 to 2 kilowatts, right? 1 to 2 kilowatts. So 1 megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts, all right? And so a large AI data center is using 300 to 1,000 megawatts. One hyperscale AI facility can use over 500,000 times more. So these things are massive. They're energy guzzlers. And you just simply need stable energy for this. And to put this into perspective, the United States currently has approximately 5,000 data centers. 600 to 700 are hyperscale or large cloud facilities. And to support the projected AI demand through the early 2030s, the US is expected to need 1,500 to 2,000 additional large data centers. And Canada is probably likely to need 100 to 200 new major facilities concentrated in Ontario, Quebec, and in Alberta, probably even BC a bit. This is literally implying that we need hundreds, if not thousands, of gigawatts of new baseload power demand across North America. And you can't support this through renewables. It's not feasible. It's just quite simply not feasible. You need a stable power source that's going to be feeding the system so that you can support this. I actually saw Kevin O'Leary I watched it on LinkedIn. He was talking about how Canada's big innovation boom can actually come from data centers because we have cheap energy, right? We have cheap energy, and we have the weather to support it. Why the weather is important is because these things create a ton of heat, and Canada's naturally cold weather is conducive to naturally cooling down these data centers that are going to be emitting large amounts of heat. All right, so we don't have to invest tons of money into serious cooling systems because we're not going to put them in a desert. We're going to put them anywhere basically in Canada because it's cold everywhere basically, right? And so nuclear is really becoming inevitable, right? It provides you with that constant base load with higher energy density. It's a small land footprint, extremely long operational life. And so one large nuclear reactor produces anywhere between 1 to 1.6 gigawatts of steady power. That's enough, guys, to support 1 to 3 major AI data center clusters. This is why this isn't like a nuclear rediscovery. Governments are literally forced into it. And the AI boom is compressing this. And the governments need to act fast because AI is evolving faster than government bureaucracy. Especially Canada's government bureaucracy. Canada's government bureaucracy is a catastrophe. It's actually embarrassing how long things take to get approved in Canada. And so, our market didn't fail accidentally. It's responding rationally, right? Private investment doesn't want to touch this because it's just expensive. You're going to have a handful of people that can actually finance this. And then the question is, what's the profitability on it? No one wants to touch that. If that question is, if there's too many variables behind that question, no private investor is going to want to touch it because of the mass amounts of regulation, because it's nuclear power, right? It's dangerous. You have to follow a ton of these various regulations and these standards. No one wants to touch that shit, right? That's why private investment goes into clean power, into clean tech, because there's very little regulation behind it. What kind of regulation exists behind putting up a wind turbine or solar panels, putting up a solar farm? Significantly less than building a fucking nuclear reactor that if it blows up, it's going to destroy all of Southern Ontario. That's the government's job. The governments are now they're at least trying to step in. The US is. We'll see what Canada does. because energy security has become national security, and it always should be considered national security. And AI, and I've seen this, a lot of these billionaires are talking about it. Elon Musk talked about it several times. Saw Sam Altman talk about it as well. I also saw the CEO of NVIDIA, Henson, talk about it. Basically, AI is going to create, this is what they're expecting, and this is why it's considered a strategic asset, is AI is going to start creating this flywheel of innovation with our scientists, right? They're saying that it's not going to replace our scientists, but it's going to help our scientists solve mathematical equations and these complex physics problems faster, and it's going to start creating a flywheel of it's just going to start solving these problems faster, and our innovation is going to start exploding, right? And because their language learning models, everything gets saved, it's going to be easy to access this information and continue to innovate, right? And this is why this power is going to be extremely needed. And this is where Canada can really play a massive role, is because we have our own uranium. We have great nuclear physicists. We have the weather. We have conducive weather to it. We can just build a ton of AI data centers across the country to at least support North American AI needs. And this could be our competitive advantage to the US if we thought about it a little harder. But we don't think about anything. We don't think about anything. We can't even get a pipeline built without having, the First Nations complaining, or our premier in BC, that loser EB, complaining about it either. The concern here isn't nuclear power itself. It's that our governments are once again socializing risk while trying to privatize the future upside, right? We can't, that's short-term thinking. And Canada is constantly stumped in short-term thinking. Nuclear power is going to be a stepping stone into our strategic relevance in the Western world. But what's going to happen is our taxpayers are going to start underwriting the construction delays, the cost of overruns, the financing of any risks and regulatory uncertainties. That always happens, sure. But the upside is going to be a lot greater if it's done right, if we don't have all this bureaucracy that goes behind it. So what this really means for Canadians is electricity demand is rising faster than most people expect. And I don't think people really realize this truly, right? And that power prices will reflect long-term capital costs, not our short-term politics, right? If we start adding AI infrastructure into Canada without building the back-end energy infrastructure for it, our energy costs are going to start just skyrocketing. Data centers will also compete directly with households and industry for reliable power. This is why we need more power. And who I really feel like policymakers are the ones that have been failing Canada systematically here. Because it's policymakers who have pretended intermittent energy could replace baseload without any consequences. And that intermittent energy is clean tech, right? We're talking about solar panels, we're talking about wind turbines, because the sun doesn't shine every day, and it's not windy every day, right? And regulators who slowed nuclear to a crawl while demand quietly exploded, right? And the more advanced your economy gets, the higher the demand for energy and power become. This is natural. I don't know why we're pretending as if it's something new. This is a natural occurrence. The government is at fault here. And it's all of our policymakers. They're all extremely short-sighted. This was completely foreseeable. It was just postponed. Now we're living through the consequences of all this terrible policymaking that we've been living through. To kind of close it all off, guys, the nuclear revival, it's not about saving the climate or chasing these big green headlines. It's quite literally about feeding the electricity appetite of artificial intelligence before it starves economic growth. And this is literally the turning point. This is literally the turning point. Nuclear power may be unavoidable, but that makes discipline, transparency, and accountability even more critical this time around. This is all I have for you guys today. Please like, share, and subscribe. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is Canuck News. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and like Captain Say.